In November of 2000, South Carolina Athletics Director Mike McGee called Brad Scott into his office. Scott had been the Gamecocks' head football coach for 5 years at that point. He had a 23-32 overall record and had just finished a 1-11 season. McGee was bringing him in to fire him. Mel Parker, who played football for McGee at Duke when McGee was the Blue Devils' head coach and worked for McGee in South Carolina's athletics department, heard the story of what happened next later from McGee.
I will tell you this story that he told me, and I'll let you decide whether you want to use it or not. When he called Brad Scott into his office, he said he told him he was going to have to replace him, and he said Brad's response was, replace me? Well, who you going to get? Lou Holtz?
That's exactly who they got. Holtz, a literal Hall of Fame coach, was one of the biggest names in college coaching at the time. He was only 3 years removed from coaching at Notre Dame, where he won the 1988 National Championship, and he was hired by McGee in 1999. He was still one of the biggest names in the sport, and South Carolina's hiring of him was a coup. We are Langston Moore, Preston Thorne, and Josh Kendall. Langston and Preston both played on the defensive line for South Carolina, and Preston was a senior captain on that 2004 team. Langston was in his second year with the NFL's Cincinnati Bengals by then, and together they now own Athletes and Artists. Josh has covered South Carolina football for a decade and now works for The Athletic, and will narrate most of this podcast about the 2004 brawl between South Carolina and Clemson, and the issues that surrounded it and stemmed from it. If you missed episode 1, be sure to listen for the background on the Carolina-Clemson rivalry. This is episode 2, which focuses on former South Carolina head coach Lou Holtz. We need to let you know now there is some adult language in this episode. This is The Fight. Kevin Turco was in awe of Holtz. He grew up in Ohio and watched Notre Dame games with his family. After a 6-year military career, he was trying to get into coaching, and early in 2004, he was an assistant at St. Peter's University, a small Jesuit college in New Jersey that no longer has a football team. It was not the big time. Lou Holtz was the big time.
When my grandfather passed away, I just made a promise with him that someday I'd go work for Coach Holtz and become a head football coach and be the very best I could possibly be. And so I was in a bar in Boston, bumped into my ex-girlfriend. We were all drinking, and she asked me what I was doing with my life. And at the time, I was driving an 88 Delta with red velvet seats, and I was living in a basement of rent I had. And so I just blurted out, I said, I'm going to go work for Lou Holtz at South Carolina. And so the next day, half hungover, I drove from Boston, Massachusetts, straight down to Columbia, South Carolina. Never even met Coach Holtz. And so I had this little 8-page letter that I was writing at the time. I called it my book. I went up there and saw Rita, and I told her I came down here in pursuit of my dream to work for Coach Holtz, and it was a life-changing event for me.
Turco wore his old Marine Corps uniform for that first interview and remembers tearing up simply because Holtz agreed to meet with him.
It's funny, I look back now on it, and when I got into his office, he was behind his desk, and I was looking at him, and I had tears in my eyes, and I'm in a Marine Corps uniform.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, he was probably reaching underneath the desk for security, there was the button.
Turco lived in the stadium for 6.5 months while he worked for Holtz.
Rita sends me or called me. She's like, "Hey, Coach Holtz wants to meet with you" or something. And it was always a special project, go get his lighter fixed or get his gas in his car. He's like, hey, Kevin, Doc Walter said he was giving a tour around the stadium, and they went in the Heisman room, and there's a Gatorade and a pillow and a blanket, and what the hell is going on in there? I can't afford to go live anywhere else. This is where I'm living.
Holtz might have been a hero at Notre Dame, but he walked into a mess at South Carolina, and the cleanup took a while. The Gamecocks were 0-11 in his first season, a season that seemed to make Holtz appreciate the fact that Scott had at least managed to win one game in 1998. Eric Kimry was a backup quarterback and one-time starter at South Carolina from 2000 to 2002. He's currently the head coach at the Hammond School in Columbia, where he's won 10 state championships. Like almost everyone who has played for Holtz, or ever spent any time around Holtz, or ever watched Holtz on television, he does a Lou Holtz impersonation. Unlike everyone, he does a very good one. Here's Kimry retelling something he heard Holtz say often during the 1999 season.
My first year at South Carolina, Brad Scott was the head coach, asked me to come walk on and said he'd put me on scholarship. I was excited to be a Gamecock. And we went out and played Ball State the first game of the year, and we won that game, and I thought this thing was going to be easy. Well, unfortunately, we lost the next 10 games, and at the end of the year, they fired Coach Scott, and they brought in this man named Lou Holtz. And Lou Holtz, of course, everyone knows, is a legendary coach, and I don't think he anticipated the struggles that he was going to have that 1999 season. And we're playing Vanderbilt, 0-8. South Carolina was 0-8. Vanderbilt was not very good. And we had Florida and Clemson left on the schedule. And we lost to Vanderbilt 11-10. And after the game, Coach Holtz was pretty livid. We were 0-9. It was clear we weren't going to win another game and finish the year winless. And he comes in the locker room and he says, Brad Scott deserves a trophy this damn big for winning one game with your sorry asses.
Holtz told his players he only used the curse words in the Bible, several said, but some of them started to doubt that after a while. Either way, he eventually did what he had been hired to do, turn the South Carolina program around. In 2000, just one season after finishing 0-11, he led the Gamecocks to an 8-4 record and a victory over Ohio State in the Outback Bowl. Team manager Jonathan Dupree, who we will later see has an unfortunate starring role in the fight, remembers Holtz having the loyalty of his players.
The only three curse words I use are damn, hell, and ass, and all three are in the Bible.
I don't know how he coached at Notre Dame because I've never heard anybody say GD more in my life than Lou Holtz.
Say, hey, son, I'm going to tell you this right here. You need to go to church on Sunday and ask God for forgiveness for making me cuss.
But, I mean, the players loved him because he stuck up for them, had the back.
Right.
It was a little more complicated than that, says Woody Telford, an offensive lineman on the 2004 team and another key figure in the fight.
Lou Holtz going to say something foul. He's not going to bite his tongue for nobody. Right. But at the same time, he said good things also. He ain't just like break you down. But at the same time, sometimes Lou Holtz, you just never know what you're gonna get out of him.
Can you remember Can you remember something wild that he said to you?
Hey, fat ass.
Although Holtz's upbringing was as an offensive coach, his fingers touched every position group at times, and it didn't always bring out the best results, several of his players remember. Dondrell Pinkins, who we met in the first episode and is now the head coach at Pelham High School in Georgia, was South Carolina's starting quarterback for most of the 2004 season, but didn't play in the Clemson game that year due to injury.
I think he was a phenomenal coach. He knows the game, and you can't take that away from him. Now, some of his decision-making, I question from time to time, because he's going to go and say, all right, we're going to do this, and we all sitting here looking like, that ain't really a good damn decision, but, hey, we're going to trust you because you're supposed to be our guy. We're going to try to make it work. And if it works, he looks like the junior. If it don't work, it's like nobody expected South Carolina to do this anyway.
Taki Muhammad, who played both cornerback and wide receiver for the Gamecocks, felt the same way.
Every position he touched the help on, it didn't end well. You're playing on eggshells.
But there's no denying that something Holtz was doing was working. He was named the National Coach of the Year by Football News in 2000, and the next year he led the team to a 9-3 record and another Outback Bowl win over Ohio State. On the surface, everything was great. Underneath, things weren't always so smooth. After leaving South Carolina, Holtz would go on to be introduced to an even wider audience as a member of ESPN's college football programming. As the folksy Dr. Lou, he gave television viewers a taste of the kind of motivational tactics he used with his team by giving staged pep talks to various teams around the country who had big games that day, or dishing out words of wisdom the Gamecocks had heard time and again.
The doctor will see you now.
I'm sure you're asking, what qualifications do I have to be called doctor? Well, I did graduate in the lower half of my high school class, and it was a rather stupid class overall. I have written 3 New York Times bestseller, the only person in the world that's written more books than he's read. I have 4 honorary doctorate degree, and my mother loves me. With those qualifications, let's go to our first call.
Pinkins won't soon forget his first team meeting with Holtz after signing with the team.
I can recall my first meeting with him as a freshman, my freshman class. Sitting in there, he walks in, and the first thing he tells us is, there's 2 reasons you come to South Carolina. 1, your ass is a loser. 2, you want to be surrounded by losers. That's the first thing I heard from Coach Holtz when I stepped foot on campus and met with him as a freshman. That was our introductory meeting with the real Coach Holtz, not the one that came and sat in the living room, not the one outside when everybody's watching, but one-on-one. That was the first thing we heard.
Several of Holtz's former players felt he could cross the line from motivator to manipulator too often. Matthew Thomas, a senior receiver for South Carolina in 2004, and the number 15, who can be seen sprinting toward the fight at the start of the brawl, called Holtz a master manipulator.
That's what Coach Holtz done. Yeah. Like, I didn't realize that back then, but now as an adult, I look back on those years, man, and that's all Coach Holtz was. He was a brainwasher.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? He was great at manipulating people.
Yeah.
He was a master manipulator.
Holtz's penchant for pulling at his team's emotions came out especially heavy during rivalry games. At South Carolina, he gave his players an annual quiz on the history of the Clemson series and threatened to not play the ones who couldn't pass. Between Holtz's focus on the game and annual festivities on campus leading up to the Clemson game, the Gamecocks were in a fever pitch by the time the 2004 game rolled around. Here's Troy Williamson again.
So you know how it is. Leading up to the week of, we do all the Tiger Burn, all that stuff. They just teach you. They have pretty much it's like a whole class on how to hate Clemson.
But the studying wasn't helping on the field. Entering the 2004 game, Holtz had a 1-4 record against his biggest rival. Game days were sometimes hectic too. Pinkins remembers Holtz being upset that he didn't know a play Holtz was trying to call on the sideline. Pinkins looked to Lou's son and offensive coordinator Skip Holtz for some guidance.
And he calls the play, and I look at Skip, and I go, "What's that?" And he goes, "Skip, how the hell are we playing a quarterback that don't know the damn plays? Get his ass out." And I go, "Coach, what was that?" He said, "He's using Notre Dame terminology." I said, "Well, hell, I didn't play at Notre Dame. How the hell am I supposed to know what play he's calling?"
Holtz's practices are another part of his legend. As one of the team's managers, Dupree often was in charge of keeping up with the period count at practice. Most college teams use 5-minute periods to divide all their practices and use cards the size of poster boards, or these days digital displays, to keep track of which period the team is on so assistant coaches know what they're supposed to be doing. For instance, the team might work on special teams for periods 1 through 4 and then switch to offensive or defensive drills in period 5. Dupree can remember Holtz telling him to stop the clock on many periods because he wanted his team to get extra work in that area. The hand signal for that was Holtz gesturing to Dupree and placing his hand over his wrist as if to cover up or stop his watch. Gamecocks of that era remember the hand signal well, if not fondly, and Dupree often got the blame for it.
The period!
And all you guys are looking up at me like, you better keep that fucking clock going. It was intimidating. I mean, I got dunked in water by Takeem Muhammad and a bunch of other guys, ice bath because of it. Yeah, man, it was. So Lou, and one time, I forget what he did. He got mad at me for one thing where I didn't understand what he was asking me to do or something like that. He told me to come to his office after practice, but he couldn't remember anything. So I was like, I'm not going to go because he's going to forget, and he did. And I never. I mean, I went back into the equipment room and I was like, I asked them juniors and seniors, so you can't trust because they're just trying to bust your balls. And I was like, do I really need to go? And they're like, man, I would go if I were you. And I was like, I ain't going. I'm like, he's going to forget. And I never heard about it again.
During one practice, Holtz made Pinkins live for a practice session to test the health of his knee. During the season, most college teams don't practice with full contact because of the wear and tear on the players and the fact that it can lead to injury or simply to fatigue by Saturday. A player who is live can be tackled to the ground. Quarterbacks are almost never live, and Pinkins said he was the only player who was live that day. The long practices, the mind games, all of it began to wear the Gamecocks out. Holtz bemoaned this very fact in his press conference following the 2004 Clemson game, but he never seemed to make the correlation between his behavior and the team's late-season state of mind. Here's Muhammad again.
Playing for Lou Holtz at South Carolina, we would bang Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So by the time you get to the end of the season, your body's worn the hell out.
Yeah, Coach Holtz was that kind of coach, man. I'm just gonna be honest, man. I never had tougher practices on any level than I did Coach Holtz practices. And even with the coaching change and being able to play under Coach Spurrier and whatnot, man, there's nothing compared to the toughness of a Coach Holtz practice, man. But you know that because you can remember on Thursday and being in full pads, man.
Right.
Right. So you know the philosophy.
Yeah, you walk in that locker room and looking up at that board and see that full pass, you sick to your stomach.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
So, and it ain't just full pass, it's full pass to hit.
That's right. Yeah, it ain't just full pass. No, it's full contact, man. You got to practice being an SEC player. You remember?
Correct.
Rick Henry, who has worked as a South Carolina sports anchorman for 38 years, remembers Holtz's practice as well because of the unlimited media access to them.
With him coming in, being a legendary coach already, a superstar in the coaching ranks, had a national championship, I'm like, man, how's this guy going to be to work with? But he was very accessible, every day, every night after practice. We had good access at practice. We could roam the entire field. And, we'd be out there close enough where you were in danger of getting run over, which is good. You get some good footage. Because I would actually be talking to him one-on-one, and he gets going, and you can feel the hair stand up on the back of your neck. And I said, man, give me some pads. I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
But I think after you hear him over the course of a couple of years, maybe like, a lot of relationships, you started tuning them out.
Absolutely.
And I think, that happened with him, with his players.
Cracks were beginning to show with the coaches, too. Lou and Skip's professional relationship was the subject of a lot of stories in those days. After his career was finished, Lou Holtz would express regret that he felt South Carolina had backed out of a deal to make Skip his successor. But when they worked together, Lou took over the play-calling duties from his son. In 2017, Skip, now the head coach at Louisiana Tech, remembered that time as very difficult for everybody, but we all had to buy in. Not everybody was buying in, though. At least one Gamecock believed that Holtz had relaxed his recruiting standards late in his South Carolina tenure, leading to issues throughout the 2004 season, and perhaps even to the fight. This is John Alston, who was a senior at South Carolina in 2004.
That season, I felt like the way that the season went, it was clearly illustrated by the fight. My freshman year, Coach Holtz, when you guys came, he was, bringing the guys' character, athletes, and everything else. But as time went on, I love my guys, but at the end of the day, not everybody were character athletes as well. Also during that time, Coach came up with the Unity Council and all that stuff to where the seniors were taking care of pretty much the dirty work, and discipline.
Given everything, some South Carolina players thought cracks were beginning to show. Darryl Shropshire, a senior defensive lineman in 2004, felt Holtz was leaving before he knew Holtz was leaving.
He really didn't come out and say it right then, but you could tell by, the choice of words throughout the year, he was pretty much done.
C.J. Fry, a graduate assistant on Holtz's staff in 2004, thought Holtz wanted to be more liked than feared at the end of his tenure.
He became the granddad instead of wanting to be the father. And meaning he got tired. He said he gotten sad and a little depressed about having to be so uptight and angry and mean the way he had to present things, but that was the only way to change the culture. He said he at Notre Dame he was liked. His players liked him. Everybody liked him, and he didn't feel that way about the kids anymore. He rather because he was such a disciplinarian to get the program the correct way. And at Notre Dame, he said I could always go out and get the top 10 recruits and top 5 program recruits each year. So if the kids don't perform, they got All-Americans sitting behind them. Well, South Carolina, it was not that way. But yeah, there was a little bit of control that was lost because I believe the kids felt like they didn't have the same disciplinarian they had before.
Everyone remembers where they were when they first heard Holtz was retiring. The thing is, everyone remembers it differently. Some swear they heard during the week of the October 30th Tennessee game. Some say it was the next week when the team played Arkansas. Kerry Tharp, the school's longtime sports information director, remembers conjecture building and word finally leaking out to the wider world during Florida Week, 1 week before the Clemson game. Whenever they heard, the news had a profound impact on the players, Muhammad said.
None of the seniors, it was no more respect for Lou. The other coaches was like, come on, guys. We got to be like, we'll play for you guys.
Right.
And Coach Holtz was out there giving us orders. Everyone was ignoring him. Like, look, man, we done with it. We gave our all to you, and this is what you do.
Jabari Levy, a junior offensive lineman in 2004, says Holtz first revealed his decision to resign in the visitors' locker room at Memorial Stadium right before the Clemson game, hoping it would rally the troops. It did for some, not for others.
Right before we went out on the field, he was like, like this is it. This is my last game.
Guys, this is my last game.
He used it as a motivational technique, like to go give it all. This is it. Don't leave anything. This is my last game coaching. I wish he didn't say it before the game because some guys did get motivated and pumped up, but a lot of guys started crying. They got emotional. It was a mix. It was a bunch of emotions going on. Some guys were pumped. I was shocked and confused. Other guys were crying.
Clemson's players were also aware Holtz was near the end of his career, and they were worried about that, said Tigers running back Yusuf Kelly, who we met in Episode 1 and who played such a large role in the fight.
that was probably the worst timing for retirement. That was a huge factor. Because now let's get this out of the way. You know it was y'all's fault, all right? Let me put it. Hey, that's my story, and I'm sticking by it. But that was the big thing that week was him announcing his retirement.
The fight would be Holtz's last game. Tharp remembers he was despondent in his post-game news conference. Nashawn Goddard, an offensive lineman on that South Carolina team, wasn't any happier about it.
Man, you like, damn, we just sent Lou Holtz out on this bull crap. And he was probably the greatest, one of the best coaches of all time. Definitely one of the best motivators of all time.
Chris Matlock, Holtz's longtime equipment manager and friend, is the person who cleaned out Holtz's office 2 days later. He took Holtz's things to him that night.
Hey, Chris, come on in. Mm-hmm. So we sat down in his den, and we talked about it. He said, you've been with me a long time. What went wrong?
Chris, where did I go wrong?
I just said, Coach, you weren't Coach Holtz of old.
Yeah.
You did what you wanted. You had to do.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think there was a lot of things that he wanted to do, but it wasn't in the interest of what everybody else wanted.
You know, playing for Coach Holtz was an honor, but it was also complicated. Just like your parents, just like your teachers, just like the preachers, when you're a kid, you look up to them and you take their lessons for what they are. But as you become an adult and you start to understand things with an adult mind, you have to go back and look at them a little bit differently. You realize that they were flawed, but you also realize that they were just doing their best. As players, I think a lot of us go back and analyze Coach Holtz and the rest of our coaches, and we see that they were just men struggling to do the best that they could. This episode of The Fight was created, produced, and executed by athletes and artists. Big shout out to Josh Kendall of The Athletic for the writing. Big shout out to TK Fowler for the sound design. Major love out to our chief strategist, Aaron Myers. We're looking forward to see you next episode on The Fight.